You catch me in my new workshop, just putting some boxes together for my new French cleats on the wall here. And before we get on to the main subject of today's video, you'll notice I'm using a couple of tools that you don't normally see me use on either this channel or the main channel. And the reason for that, I'm just testing these out and a review will be coming very soon. A bit of a heads up, quite impressed. But that's not the subject of today's video, so just excuse me for a second and I've finished what I'm doing. So yes, time for some French cleats, just to get some of these tools up on the wall. And because I'm making the boxes and the hangers for the cleats today, made the cleats a couple of days ago, I thought I'd cut a number of pieces of 12mm ply to like standard thicknesses. This is 100mm, I've got some at 150 and even some here at 200. So I thought I'd run through again a really easy way of cutting to an exact width with a track saw, or replicating a piece of timber that you've already cut to the exact width. And I apologise if you've seen this on the main channel, but this is such an easy method. If you haven't got one of those fancy tables that got all the holes in, or one of those rail setups with the hinge, which most of us don't have because we don't have the room. But what you generally do have the room for is a cutting board, and that's all you need. And it's a really, really nice system that just works really well. So I just want to describe it again, because if you own a track saw or even a circular saw, this is going to make your cuts a lot more accurate and just repeatable, just absolutely perfect. So the trick to it is cutting a piece of timber, or 12mm ply should I say, the exact width of your track. Let me explain. So I start with a cutting board with a stop end at one end, which is nicely 90 degrees to the face of the cutting board. What I want to do is to cut a width of ply or MDF, it doesn't matter what it is, to exactly the same width as my track, which is really easy because if you butt it all up against a straight edge and then make the cut, by definition what you've got left is exactly the same width to the 1/10 of a millimetre as your track. And at this point I have to say, if you're using a circular saw, this works just as well with a homemade wooden track as a plunge saw type track. But just like any track, it only works for the saw that's set up for that track. So anyway, once you've got your base piece of ply or MDF or chipboard or whatever you want, this is the clever bit. Essentially, anything you put on the top that moves your guide rail away from that stop will be replicated on the bottom when you make the cut. And that's true whether the cut is 5mm wide or 500mm wide. It doesn't make any difference because you've got the board on the bottom that is exactly the width of the track you're using. It just offsets anything you put between the track and the stop end, which means you can replicate sheet material perfectly. Whatever you put in the top will be replicated out the bottom. Today I went one step further because I wanted to cut a number of sheets to exactly equal length. So I'm aiming at 100mm, 150, 125, 200. And that's easily done as well by cutting some spacers. I'm using 12mm ply here because everything I'm making is in 12mm ply. And if you're going to do this, it's really important to label it, because before you know it, you're throwing it away into the scrap bin because it just looks like a piece of scrap. And obviously this can be any width you want. But with these spacers, what you can then do is set up your track the width of the spacer away from the stop end, which means anything you cut underneath your track is going to be exactly the width of those spacers, not just approximately or to within a millimetre. If everything is tight against the stop end of your cut, it's going to be absolutely 1/10 of a millimetre perfect. Here, for every cut, you can't see, but I'm actually using clamps underneath the track to clamp everything down to the workbench. And I found if I make the cutting board the same width as the workbench, then it's really easy just to put a clamp either side and clamp everything down before every cut. Then I can quite easily release the clamps, take everything out, and within a few seconds I'm putting everything back again just to clamp it up and make another cut. This is a really quick and easy repetitive process if you're trying to get a number of sheets exactly the same width, like I am here, because I'm making boxes and holders and I want each one exactly the same width, just so they fit together really nicely, everything is square and looks right. So if you've got a track saw and you regularly cut sheet material, for the time it takes to make a cutting board like this with a nice straight perpendicular edge on one side and then a board exactly the same width as your track, is absolutely worth it, because once you've done that, every time you want to use a track saw, you can use that in the same position, and it's really easy for repeat cuts or for whatever thickness you want. Not just approximately, but absolutely perfect. And if you're making things like wardrobes or drawers or something where you need lots of strips that are exactly the same width and dimensions, and you haven't got one of those tables with lots of holes in and all the fancy gear, this is a really good DIY setup. And also, when you're not using it, just store it vertically behind the workbench. It doesn't take much to store things like this and put these in a drawer. So next time you're immediately ready to go, and actually it just makes life really, really easy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. There will be a very special tool review next week, so look forward to that. I will see you next time.